In this video, I want to talk to you about the psychology of villains. What makes them a villain? And why do we, as the audience, see them as beloved characters in the community, and in some cases even fan favourites? What really got me interested in villains in general was when I heard the quote, "A hero would sacrifice you for the world, a villain would sacrifice the world for you," which made me question how many of us would become a villain if the situation called for it. Essentially, the choice between being a hero and a villain is rooted in selflessness. Heroes are expected to make the right choice which in the long term would benefit the majority, even if that means the loss of a loved one. A perfect example of this is in the game The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Peter has a choice to make. He can either watch his Aunt May die to a virus and save everyone else infected, or he can use the anti-venom on Aunt May and save her life, which will result in the death of everyone else affected. What would you do? The role of a villain is a crucial one as it plays a part in every major franchise in some shape or form. In the wider media, we have seen a ton of villain backstories and motivations, and not all of them have compelling reasoning, but there are a few where we can sympathise and understand their actions. A popular controversy online a few years ago now was Thanos, debating whether he was a villain or not. You can see from his eyes that he wasn't the genocidal titan that the Avengers saw. Thanos saw himself as the saviour of the universe. Instead of letting overpopulation and starvation and death be the end, he took it upon himself to remove 50% of the population. And even to this day, I'm still torn on whether Thanos was the villain of the story. You see, he didn't just wake up one day and think, "Let me wipe out half of existence." It was the opposite. He experienced this personally on Titan. His entire planet was eventually wiped out due to overpopulation and resource depletion. His worldview and perception would naturally be different to ours. So factoring in his lived experience and his anguish, he didn't want to see this happen to anyone else. Now when you put it that way, is he really the villain? Now, don't get me wrong, true villains do exist who are just psychopaths and want to see the world burn, the Joker being the top of that list. He's an agent of chaos. But what I've learned by watching a plethora of anime is that there are two sides to every story. Let's use Pain or Nagato from Naruto as an example. Nagato lived a tragic life ever since he was a child and lived through the Great Ninja War, but Nagato was shown the right path by Jiraiya Sensei early on when he was a child. Nagato was even hailed as the child of prophecy, someone who would bring peace to the ninja world, but due to the loss of his best friend, he lost sight of that vision and he decided to reach peace in a different way. That was the crucial moment in his life, where his journey to achieve peace became twisted. You see, to Nagato, everyone had to experience the same pain he did in order to fully understand each other. That, to him, would lead to true peace, mutual understanding, and it all stems from pain. To him, that was the only way, and you can see the twisted logic, and as much as you're probably sitting at home disagreeing, this is Nagato's reality. This is his world. Villains are made by pain, by choices or circumstances that could break anyone, which is why the villain role is such an interesting topic, because it could quite literally be anyone at any point of their story. Look at Harvey Dent from the Batman movies. He was the pinnacle of justice and unrelenting in the face of crime in Gotham City, but the Joker managed to turn him, tearing down Gotham's saviour and making him into the twisted villain called Two-Face, who is filled with bitterness and seeks revenge. Now I think the villains we have more sympathy towards are the characters who seem to have no choice in their path of villainy. A popular example of this is Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Zuko was born and raised in the Fire Nation, who were the initiators to the Great War, which has terrorized and enslaved the other nations. Zuko, in one of the war meetings, spoke out of line and was cast out, sentenced to capture the Avatar in order to regain his honour and his spot back in the Fire Nation at his father's side. To Zuko, this was his only path to reclaim what he'd lost. However, only later did he realise that there were more options available to him. Now what I find really interesting about Zuko is that regardless of his situation, Zuko being the prince of the Fire Nation and being a firebender, he was almost instantly branded as the enemy. He's an enemy by association. You see, we're made to believe that everyone in the Fire Nation are simply bad from the get-go, and it's only really after the Avatar ventures into the Fire Nation that we see that they're just normal civilians, just like the rest of the world. Having different perspectives is very important when judging someone, since it's really easy to fall into the trap of just branding someone as a villain when they might not necessarily fit the criteria. The reason villains are more popular than heroes is probably because we can relate to villains more. A lot of you watching this video have probably done some things you're not proud of, and unfortunately it's easy to remember the mistakes or moments of regret as they linger much longer within our psyche. The pain of losing a loved one is something we'll all experience at some point or another, and knowing that pain allows us to be able to empathise with that loss when you see a villain go through the same thing. Granted, their response is usually a little more extreme. Take Obito, when he lost Rin. He sought to set the world on fire to reunite with her inside of an eternal genjutsu, and even so, there's that part in all of us that would do anything to see our loved ones again. Anime and TV shows, they take on normal human emotions and they exaggerate them to a point where it can have worldwide consequences. But the core is always something so basic, something that we've all felt at one point or another, which is why I think understanding villains is such a crucial part of everyday life. If we can learn, understand and sympathise with broken characters, we can take that into our own lives, albeit on a much smaller scale. Take a look at Geto from Jujutsu Kaisen. He believed in justice and helping the weak, all up until the very system he believed in started to create resentment, and began to fester inside as he realised that his comrades and friends, one after another, fell victim to the very curses that he sought to protect people from. And from here does his hatred for non-sorcerers begin. But you can understand it, because without them, his friends would still be alive. It brings it all into scope, and you start to question, is this just the inevitable outcome for the Jujutsu sorcerers? You either die in battle, another name lost to the world, or you live long enough to despise the system and the people you swear to protect. I want to make it clear that not all characters need to be understood, and some characters can be bad just for the sake of being bad. Look at Palpatine from Star Wars. His goal is to primarily rule the entire galaxy, but his motivation to be in such a position is unknown. All we really know is that he's power hungry. Does Star Wars do a deep dive in order to explain his backstory and the reason he has this monstrous goal? Not really, but the fact of the matter is he doesn't need one. He's well written, he's a character that pulls strings from the shadows and redefines what we might perceive as a victory for the protagonist. Look at Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. He wipes out Dooku, but before that he gets the Jedi an army which he's going to later command to kill them all. Well, most of them anyway. He takes power in a very underhanded way, and I can just appreciate that as a viewer. But this does open up the question, what makes a good villain? You could argue that it's just down to personal preference, but there are common factors that make ones better than others. One of these being when a villain believes they're in the right. I love the moral ambiguity of leaving the viewer to decide whether the villain is actually the villain. This is usually when the villain finds a solution to a problem which breaks the norm of what we might consider the right way to do something. And I think a good example of this is the hero killer Stain. Now, when he first appeared on the screen of My Hero Academia, I remember getting chills, and he immediately became one of my favourite characters in the entire show. Stain is basically someone who punishes heroes for being heroes for what he considers to be the wrong reasons. He is known to have killed many pro-heroes simply due to the fact that they use their quirks for idolization and fame rather than genuinely attempting to help those in need. Now, the reason why Stain is a great example is because even though he's a villain, in the normal standards of the word, he, like the protagonist of the show, idolizes All Might and sees him as the perfect hero, unlike the rest of the villains who see All Might as their enemy. So again, it's that morally grey area which I just love when it comes to villains, as even if their message or goal is twisted and wrong, it sort of makes sense and I can get behind it if it was, executed in a different way. I think another crucial part about a villain to me is competence. I think a villain needs to be dangerous in some form of the word, whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally, any form of threat. But I want there to be a possible future where the villain could succeed, similar to how they ended Avengers Endgame, where Thanos managed to click his fingers and wipe out half of the civilization, even though this was a short-lived victory. I remember sitting in the cinema stunned at the fact that this was the ending to the movie, but it was refreshing. Now, even though I mentioned how Palpatine was a great villain, the reason he'll never make it into my top 10 is that he lacked the depth, which is something I am personally a huge fan of when it comes to villains. I'm a sucker for backstory. I love seeing what shaped the villain to who they are today, and I love a good tragic tale. Now, those who haven't seen the Hunter x Hunter anime will never see what a beautiful villain Miriam is. I was actually going to make a standalone video on just how much I love this character, but essentially there are chimera ants who feed humans to the ant queen. The queen ant then gives birth to a whole new generation of ants which have human-like features, and some are even able to retain memories from their previous lives as a human. Long story short, the queen ant gives birth to the king of ants, Miriam, who who is insanely strong and portrayed as evil. But we soon realise that Meruem is much more. He explains the human condition perfectly. He clearly states that humans are separated by borders, which on one side people are starving, on the other they're feeding in excess, and he explains how he would put an end to it. It gets to a point in the show where I side with him. I realise he's not evil, he's logical. He has the power and means to achieve what he says, and his actions previous to that point in the anime show that he would keep his word. The villain Meruem is honourable. And that, for me, is how he really goes to push the boundaries of what we might otherwise consider to be a traditional villain.